travel isn't just about destinations, it's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabocha, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place. Whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
The Money Show.
Personal Finance with Warren Ingram.
Well, with so much uncertainty swirling around at the moment ahead of Trump's big speech a little later today and, tomorrow morning, our time, I suppose I should say, and so many things changing so quickly, when better than to have a conversation about the personal finance rules we should know and we should follow. Warren Ingram, as you know, is a certified financial planner at Galileo Capital. Warren, good evening. You have an impeccable sense of timing. This is a very good moment to have this conversation.
I don't know what uncertainty you're talking about, Stephen. It seems everything's absolutely hunky-dory to me.
Well, thanks very much indeed. Okay. Okay, there are a few things that you've got to, and I made the point earlier, you've got to control what you can control. There are no certainties in life. So let's start sort of at the very beginning, shall we? One of your first points is that you need to pay off your expensive debt as quickly as possible. And in some level, this makes, complete sense. Very easy to understand.
So I think to your point about controlling the uncontrollables, when so much is uncertain, you need to try and build in as much flexibility into your financial position as possible. And one of the things that's extremely difficult to navigate or to negotiate is when you potentially lose your job, your salary gets reduced, or your income levels go down for whatever reason, and you owe banks, on a credit card or a personal loan or an overdraft, or even all of those together, and potentially a microloan, to boot. And so it's really important that when life is so difficult and so uncertain, that you try and get yourself as much breathing room as possible. And so I think focusing on your most expensive debts are key in this situation. And I often think, Stephen, that people make the mistake of thinking your expensive debt is the thing that costs you the most rands per month. So if you're paying 50,000 Rand a month on a home loan, and you're paying 3,000 Rand a month on a credit card, you might be tempted to say, well, my home loan is my most expensive debt. And that's not true. Your most expensive debt is the thing that charges you the highest rate of interest every month. And, doing a quick search on what you could be charged on credit card debt, for example, at the moment, you could be paying as much as 21% a year on your credit card. To give you a context, if you don't pay your credit card debt off at all, it means that your debt will double against you every 3.5 years. So if you owe 100,000 Rand now, in 3.5 years' time, it will have doubled to 200,000 Rand. And unfortunately, there is no high-quality, reliable investment in the world that's guaranteed to grow at 21% a year or faster. So the answer is, pay off your expensive debt as fast as you absolutely can. And if you're in the position where you don't have that kind of expensive debt now, make sure that you do everything possible to stay away from those debts when life is so absolutely uncertain.
And I mean, it's also making sure you understand what your short-term, often your short-term, but what your expensive debt is. So that can be an overdraft or credit cards, store cards sometimes too.
Exactly, and I think it's worth going through your bank statements every now and then just to see what accounts you have open. Make sure that you're going through your emails to see who's sending you, what institutions are sending you statements, and do a credit check. A lot of the time on your banking app you can do a credit check for free. I think it's once a year that you can do a credit check. So just understand who it is that you owe money to, and then very importantly, go and check with them what the interest rates are that you're paying. They're obliged by law to tell you that. They're not allowed to say to you, we don't know. They're allowed to say, we'll come back to you, but they must tell you what that is. And then you rank those in order of interest that you're paying. In other words, who's charging the highest rate of interest. you do everything you possibly can to pay off the minimums on all the debt that you owe, and then you pay off much more on the most expensive debt first. So if it's your credit card at 21%, then you pay extra into that every month until your credit card's at zero. Then if it's your overdraft, which might be at 18%, you do everything you can to pay that down, and so on until you get to the point where you don't owe any money on those expensive debts, or as I would call them, bad debts.
Your home loan, we had a conversation about this recently, Warren. How can you sort of make, what sort of principles should you follow there?
I think it's, understanding that, these are personal finance rules for life. So understanding that by the time you get to retirement, you need to be entirely debt-free. And that then includes your home loan. So once you've hit your most expensive debts, your shorter term debts, the next thing to do is to look at the other debts that you might have. And most likely for a lot of us, if we don't have those short-term debts and those very expensive debts, we might have a home loan and we might have car finance. And so I might link the two in this point, is to say, make sure you are paying a bit extra into your home loan. The problem with money is we don't have an infinite supply. So it's not as if you can pay off everything all at once, or you can afford to double every single payment that's required on a monthly basis. You still need to live, have some fun, look after your family, and try and get through the month in a solid state. So what I would say then is try and prioritize getting your car debt down, but certainly you want to try and pay a bit of extra money into your home loan as well. And what it does is it gives you some additional breathing room, because if you do hit a financial wobbly for whatever reason, and you have been paying extra money into your home loan over a period of time, the likelihood is that you've built up some positive balances in that home loan as well, which might just come very handy if you do have to skip a payment or two, but you need to know what those extra values are before you just decide to skip a payment. But certainly I would want to pay a bit more every month. And when interest rates are high, and let's say they're at, you're paying 11% or 12% a year on your home loan, the stock market might give you 12 or 13% a year. So when your interest on your mortgage or your home loan is nearly as high as the stock market return might be, it tells you that you need to be, focused on your home loan and get it paid down faster if possible. If interest rates drop, and there was a time when interest rates were nice and low, then you might be a little bit more patient and maybe not so aggressive on paying down your home loan. But at 12 or 13%, I would want to be focusing on this as well to get that paid down, extra money at least every month. You won't be able to pay off a 20-year mortgage, in 5 years, but you can give yourself a goal to say, I'd like to make a huge knock in it in the early days and try and get it done within 10 to 15 years.
And how would interest rates affect that? I mean, should you change your behavior according to interest rates?
I would. I think when interest rates are low, you can reduce your overpaying into your mortgage a little bit. So if we ever get to the stage where our home loans might only cost us 8% a year, and that stock market growth might generate you 12 or 13% a year, then you might start to balance that out to say, well, I'll keep paying a little bit of extra money into my home loan, but I'm going to direct a bit more money to my long-term savings and especially to the stock markets, because those are likely to give me, maybe 25 to 50% more growth than what I'm paying in interest on my home loan. And then when interest rates swing and they go up like they are now, then you would say, I'm going to maybe just do a minimum amount into my savings and rather pay extra into the home loan to try and get it down as fast as I possibly can.
You've got to manage your savings and your expenses, and I presume you want to actually increase your savings more quickly than your expenses.
It's one of those weird things that we do. When we start out, we earn nothing. If we hit the workforce, everyone pays us as little as they possibly can, and so we cut our cloth accordingly. In other words, if we're getting paid 10,000 Rand a month, and that's what arrives in our bank account, on a monthly basis, then we make sure that we get by with 10,000 Rand a month. But a few years later, if you're earning 15 or 16,000 Rand a month, it's amazing how your expenses suddenly creep up to the same level. And And that's a mistake that we make when we're starting to generate a bit more money on an annual basis. If you're lucky to get increases, what you need to do is say, if my salary's gone up by 3,000 Rand a month, I'm not going to let my expenses go up by 3,000 Rand a month. What I'm going to do is have a slightly better lifestyle. So I'll allow my expenses to go up by, let's say, 1,000 Rand a month. But the other 2,000 that I now have breathing room with, I'm actually going to allocate that to my savings. And so, when you start out, you might not be able to save very much money, but every time you get an increase, you make sure that the bulk of your increase goes to savings, and then you do allow yourself a bit more money to have a bit better lifestyle. And if you keep doing that year after year after year, all the way through until your retirement age, what you find is that you end up living a better life than when you started. Your quality of life has improved, but you've been able to save a lot more money because you've managed to control your expenses and allow them to grow at a much slower rate than what your income has grown.
There's a very boring phrase, be sensible. That kind of is almost the very definition of it, isn't it?
It is, and it's funny when I meet people, especially high income earning professionals. Not to call them out and embarrass them, but the lawyers and especially the advocates, and then the doctors, and then especially the medical specialists, they seem to fall into this trap. You kind of walk around the workplaces where they are, and you look at their parking garages, and they're full of very nice cars. You look at their where they stay, and they live in very nice houses, and then you realize they're sitting on a lot of debt, and they've allowed their lifestyles to accelerate as their positions have improved, their titles have got bigger, and I'm not just picking on the doctors and the lawyers. I think it happens across the board, and that's fine if you want to buy those lifestyle assets, but you need to be doing that with cash, not with debt, and so I think it's almost a little bit of salary creep and expenses creep. We just do it because we don't really plan and we're not intentional about the way we spend. More money arrives in our bank account. We get happy. We reward ourselves. We reward ourselves the next month, and we don't ever actually plan to save more. So just do a little bit of planning every time you get an increase, and give yourself a bit of a reward, and then keep going. And common sense is a rare thing, and that's probably why so few people hit financial freedom.
I suppose. And look, feel free to pick on lawyers any time on the Money Show. It's fine. You've spoken about this a little bit before, but having an emergency fund, clearly something that seems obvious, very few people do. I often wonder if you have an emergency fund, shouldn't you just put it in your bond because it'll do more for you there?
You're a man of wisdom. I think it's a very good place to have an emergency fund. So if you've got a home loan, and to use the example, it's costing you 11% interest on a yearly basis, then taking extra money and putting in, let's say, somewhere between 3 to 6 months worth of your expenses and storing that in your home loan is a magic idea, because actually what you're doing by storing it in there, you're saving yourself an interest rate of 11% a year. So I would view it as almost as an investment that's giving you a guaranteed return of 11% tax-free. And the plan is that you shouldn't really want to spend that money. It is literally an emergency fund. So it is the money that you draw on when let's hope it never happens again. But if there were another pandemic that arrives and we all have to shut down and people lose their jobs, that kind of major scenario that just comes from left field, you can't plan for it. So the way you can protect yourself and the way you derive some certainty in an uncertain world is have an emergency fund. If you don't have a home loan, or maybe you're not so disciplined with your savings, the extra money that you store in your home loan, then put it in a money market account linked to your banking profile, something that you can access in short order. If there's an emergency, you can't plan for it, so you might need the money quite quickly. But I just want to emphasize, this is not your holiday fund, your new phone fund, or your shoes or handbag fund, or whatever it is, your new shirt. This is really, honestly, for emergencies, and new clothes are rarely an emergency.
Okay, we've got a question from Mandy. Mandy is asking, we would like to start some investments for my children. What is the best way to do this? We'll have an answer for you in a moment, Mandy. It's a question we get fairly often. Warren Ingram, of course, co-founder of Galileo Capital with personal finance.
The Money Show.
Personal Finance with Warren Ingram.
Mandy's question for you, Warren. I'd like to start some investments for my children. What's the best way to do this? It's one of those questions that comes through fairly often.
You can tell we've got some great parents listening to the show, and I think the real key for me is probably the tax-free savings account. If you can set up a tax-free savings account for your children as early as possible, and even if you can't save the maximum for them per year, and the maximum we're allowed is 36,000 Rand a year or 3,000 Rand a month. So even if you can't do that, don't get disheartened. If you can only do 500 Rand a month or 5,000 Rand a year, it doesn't matter. Make that your starting point for building up an investment for your children, because you can open it in their names, and that's important because it's tax-free growth, it's tax-free money, and so by the time if you maximize that amount over their lifetime, and we're allowed to do 36,000 Rand a year up to a maximum of 500,000 for a lifetime. If you allow that to happen by the time they're 18 or 19, you've given them a major financial head start. And if times are tough and you've got friends and family who want to give your children a gift, every birthday or whatever it is, then just say to them, you know what, I would love you to contribute to their tax-free savings account. So it's a lovely way to allow the close friends and family to help contribute to your children's financial future, and you're doing it in such an efficient way. So yes, I think tax-free savings account are the one gift that keeps on giving, and just make sure that you try and choose something like a global equity investment or a JSE stock market investment. Please don't go and put it into a money market account or a fixed deposit. That's just not going to give a lot of growth.
So you need something that actually gives it a bit of booma, something that has a bit of an accelerator to it. Diversification. We all want a free lunch in this world. It's the only way.
It is the only way, and I think the too good to be true story with money seems to repeat itself over and over again. So many people get caught in scams, and even if it's not a fraud, it's just sometimes someone pitching an idea to you. I can't believe the number of people that are still thinking the only way to invest your money now is to just buy the 10 biggest tech shares in the world, and that will be the thing that will give you 15 or 20% growth a year. And the reason they say that is simply because that's what tech shares have done for the last few years. You need to know that whatever happened in the last 5 years, it's almost guaranteed that the past will not exactly replicate itself into the future. In other words, if 10 or 5 or 10 tech shares have done incredibly well for the last 5 years, it's almost certain that something else will do incredibly well for the next 5 years, and you don't know what that's going to be. And so the only way to protect yourself is proper diversification. In other words, make sure you've got an allocation to cash, to bonds, to property companies, and to the stock exchange, and then make sure that you've got an exposure to South African businesses and assets, as well as global assets, because none of us know exactly which country is going to do well. And I think it's very difficult when we're in a time like this, which is so uncertain, to just be relaxed and calm to say, well, I'll just keep carrying on. But the reality is you can't predict what's going to happen with trade wars. You can't predict what's going to happen with South Africa being targeted by Trump, if that's what he's doing. What we can do is we can back companies, and we can back businesses to adapt to whatever's going on in the world, and to then generate growth into the future. So I think proper diversification, where you've got somewhere around 25 to 75% invested overseas, and then making sure that you've got a solid allocation to global stock markets. And I think, if you're younger and you've got more time to invest, you can afford to go right up to around 75% in shares. If you're older, or you've got a very compromised financial position, you probably need to scale that down, but you shouldn't have less than about 35% in shares. So the two rules of thumb around diversification is at least 25 up to a maximum of 75% overseas, and then at least 35% in stock markets up to around about 75% as a maximum.
And then you've got to know your financial freedom number, and you suggest it should be 20 times your annual expenses. I'm presuming that's annual expenses without children.
it's your expenses as they would be, at the point of retirement. So if you assume that your children are no longer financial dependents by the time you hit retirement, then by all means take the expenses for your children out of your expenses, but then include all the things that repeat on a infrequent basis. For example, if you buy a car every 5 years, then 1/5 of a car expense should be in your annual expenses. Don't forget your annual holidays, and then all of the groceries and rates and taxes and all the things that you pay today. Add that up, multiply it by 20, and that's most likely going to be the amount of money you need to have invested today to be able to fund your lifestyle when you hit retirement.
Obviously, you've got to work out what that is going to be yourself, and you've got to kind of also work out what that means for property, whether you've paid off for property, whether you're going to be renting, whatever it is. There's quite a lot of maths you might need to actually do to do it properly.
Well, yeah, I think if you're going to have a paid off house, then you would still need to include your property taxes, maintenance, etc. However, if you don't plan to own a house, then put in a rental number. The important thing is that you don't need to work it out in the future values. You do it in today's terms. So if you know you're paying 20,000 Rand a month in rent, then that's the number you put in for rent, and so you go for all of the expenses that you've got. And I think it's just tracking what you've done over the last, let's say, 3 to 6 months. That will give you a very good idea of what your annual number will be, and at least it gives you a target and a goal to work towards. You won't have it saved up today, but it's the thing you're aiming for.
Thank you very much indeed. Warren Ingram with Personal Finance on The Money Show this evening.